Good afternoon, and thank you, Juha, for a wonderful talk on augmented reality and its implications. I'm here to talk about platforms. I work at Demos Effect. We're a consultancy agency, and the thing I've been called mostly about in the past 12 months is about how to create platforms, and more specifically, how to create successful platforms. And we've been trying to figure out what the aspects of that are. Because if you think of Slush, if you think of tech industry, you could almost argue that if you have an entrepreneur who wants to do a successful story, a product or a service, eventually he or she will build a platform. And if you're building a platform, eventually you will be running into a situation where you're building a monopoly. And monopolies, of course, have good and bad things. And my argument is that we're currently looking into a phase in which we're seeing arguments and competition against this development. So, for platforms, the necessity is to figure out what they themselves can do. And I would argue that what they need to do is come up with a wider framework with almost like a social contract to figure out all the leverages, all the different aspects of their business, whether it's the workers' rights, whether it's the APIs, whether it's the data ownership issues, or the transparency of algorithms that they work with. And they need to be comprehensive and holistic about this process. So the really interesting question is why we are right now speaking about platforms. Why platforms are such a big thing right now. And the reason, of course, is bubbles. There's a lot of bubbles, and if you look backward for the past 12 months, we had this happening. We had Brexit half a year ago, when the weather in Finland was not slush, it was actually a lot nicer. And then 5 months later, we had this happening. So in the space of a year, there was Brexit and there was Trump presidency. And the really interesting question is, what is surprising about these two events? And I would argue the only really surprising thing is that these two events came to us as a surprise. So we had no idea. We didn't see it coming. We didn't anticipate it. Instead, it came out of the blue. And suddenly we were looking into a very different world, very different globe, and trying to figure out what to do there. And the reason why this happened was, of course, bubbles. The idea of filter bubble is a concept in which we're all immersed in the social media, in the media landscapes individually. There's a block of people right there. You have your own bubble, you have your own worldview, you have your own identity, and you have no idea what's happening across the aisle. You have no idea what's happening in other places or societies or cultural spheres. And this is a huge thing because it leads into situations where we need to try to find ways to understand about other people's views and perspectives. Interestingly, after the election in the US, there was a backlash. And we saw a backlash mainly against Facebook. A lot of people came to ask what Facebook should do to basically not allow these things to happen. How we should regulate Facebook, what is the role of Facebook in a democracy, what type of things we should take into consideration when we have an actor that is essentially a monopoly in its particular field that is controlling the information and media we read. So, overnight, we had a giant platform, Facebook, that is a near monopoly in its space, being asked very difficult questions about its role in our societies, it's about its manners through which it performs and such. And I would argue that Facebook is just the phase one. So Facebook is only the beginning of the discussion we'll be having about platforms. Facebook happens in the media space. Facebook is something you use, but you can not use it. You can still go out to town, you can go to the cities, you can go to the agoras and such, and you can meet people and discuss with people. There's a lot of institutions, there's a lot of physical places in which you connect. So Facebook is still not everything, but if we look forward, the really interesting question and the phase that we should all start figuring out right now is what happens when we'll see these platforms, these monopolies happening in the physical space. So what happens when what we currently know as Ubers and such are everywhere. What happens when it's not just information, but it's the services, it's our living, it's our mobility, it's our eating, it's our food, it's our health, it's our education, it's everything that we consume and use in our society. And like we all know, this is what is already happening. In the past years, we've had an emergence of digital platform economy. We've had new companies emerging into the space, connecting producers with consumers, making these interactions happen more efficiently, decreasing the transactions, and creating a lot of value. The discussion we're right now entering is whether this is a good or a bad thing. So whether we'll actually gain new things, gain power, gain ability to choose, or whether we lose it. So whether we're looking into a positive or a more negative future. And there's a lot of promise. If we think of the platform economy as a whole, if we think of the IoT that connects the physical domain into the digital platforms, it's a huge, huge market. It's a huge thing. The estimates of value in the field are enormous. So we'll be looking into trillions of dollars of valuations, new markets emerging everywhere, a new type of ideas that we can attach into. And the more fundamental thing into platform economy is the promise that it will change our social behaviors altogether. By creating a digital platform, I don't need to trust people in the same ways I used to have to. I can connect, I can use new services, I can go to the places and cities and discover something I would never have been able to discover previously. So the real promise is even more fundamental than the market promise. It's a promise that will change as a societies, as a human race, and something smarter, better, and more beautiful will come out of that. And this, in the end, is the promise of the internet that we had almost 20 years ago. But the interesting thing is that this will not happen necessarily. None of this will happen unless we'll help platforms save platforms from themselves. Because platforms and the logic of a platform is the fundamental thing that challenges platforms from establishing new type of services, new type of social patterns that we trust, that we want to use and want to use in the future as well. Right now, what is happening is a discussion on a governmental level. Right now, we're seeing governments, we'll see in the public sector and new operators asking whether a platform actor is actually beneficial for the society. So, in a very concrete terms, I'm sure you've all read news about Uber being banned, being blocked, being permitted, or asked to apply for permits in different markets, in different cities. There are cities emerging all the time that are asking platform services very difficult questions about how do you take in the role of workers' rights? How do you make the taxation systems work? There's things happening in Finland, there are things happening in Sweden, there are things happening in Barcelona in terms of the Airbnb. And this is all, like, it doesn't quite feel like the right way to go. It feels like there's a lot of pressure for us to understand how we as a society take platforms into the mix. The important thing and the fundamental thing to understand is the mistake platforms have done in this. And the mistake is that platforms have thought that they are traditional companies, which they're not. So if you think of a traditional company and how it enters a market, it makes marketing plans, it secures supply chains, it keeps the demand happy, and it lobbies. It goes into the public sector, it tries to figure out the laws, regulations, how to tackle them, but platforms are more. Platforms cannot act and be efficient by just operating as traditional companies, because just the sheer amount of stakeholders is so significant. There are so many different groups a platform needs to take into account. It's not just the public sector as a whole, it's about the different contractors, it's about the different communities in which they act. And right now we're looking into a situation where the scalability of a platform service could actually be reduced because they need to individually customize whatever they do in each of the cities they operate. So that's not a model, that's not the promise of the platform economy that was originally given. So the argument here is that if we want to fulfill the promise of a platform, we need to understand that platforms are completely different animals than traditionally thought. They're a lot more holistic by nature, a lot more societal, and due to that, the society increasingly challenges the platforms. And I mean society as a large. We here are starting to ask questions about what is the role of a digital media platform, such as Facebook, in our democracy. In our democracy, which is the fundamental basis of our society here. And that's something that should not be mistaken or lightly passed forward. Instead, we should start to figure out what type of mechanisms we need for platforms actually be efficient and go forward with, and put some agendas forward that are not necessarily from the platform's agenda or a top-down agenda from the government, but something that creates value for both. We had previously here today a session about platforms and IoT, and Juha Leppänen from Walls very interestingly said that in the tech industry, there are a lot of investors, there are a lot of people who want to do good. And I completely agree. There are a lot of people who want to change the world, who want to make the world a better place. And what we're right now lacking is frameworks through which we can do that. Frameworks through which we can say that these are the things we need to tackle. These are the important areas and domains you need to take into account if you're a platform. And the even bigger promise of a platform economy that we're looking right now is that what we'll see through platforms an emergence of a general purpose technology. A technology which allows us as a society develop further, increases the productivity as a whole. In a sense, that's kind of like the idea of a mother of platforms. I don't think we can get there unless we figure out the rules, figure out the frameworks through which platforms and societies, communities, and individuals connect. So we've been thinking this, and we've been doing a lot of research and a lot of projects in terms of creating good outlets for platforms to grow, and good rules and ideas on how we can tackle these things. And one of the initial gatherings for a framework looks like this. So, like you can see, the aspects are wide and significant. There are a lot of things in relation to legislation, of course. That's kind of like the domain and area which we right now recognize. In addition, we're talking a lot about taxation. Uber, and in Estonia, they did an open API interface for taxation. So basically connecting the Uber backend to the Estonian taxation administration. That's just the early sign. If you're open and transparent as a company, you're able to connect new developers, new people into the mix of the platform, and thus increase the trust of a platform in the society. Then again, there are a lot of people from the user end. There's a lot of people in the UX side of the things. There are a lot of things happening in the data ownership space. We here in Finland have been thinking a lot about how we build up a My Data movement, an idea that whatever data, it should be owned by you, and the decisions made of the utilization should be done by yourself. There are a lot of things in relation to bubbles. If we think of a platform that algorithmically chooses and makes decisions for us, it would be nice to know as a user how those decisions are made. What is the algorithm behind that then aggregates or tells me what to do? Not to say that I wouldn't be interested. I would be superbly interested in whatever applications could help my life, made it more efficient and so forth, let me use less natural resources and such, but I would like to know how they look like. I would like to know what are the principles and values through which they are designed, and many others. So the idea of a platform is an idea of a different animal. It's an animal that we shouldn't look through the traditional lens of a company or a corporation or even a startup, but instead of something that holistically and through a variety of different means connects to our societies and us as users. And like I said in the beginning, I think this discussion is just about to start. We're right now entering a phase in which we don't only expect, but we start to require more and more things from the platforms that surround us. And if you look into whatever is happening in this wonderful hall here during these 2 days, there are a lot of platforms emerging. There are a lot of new ideas, and a lot of those are very, very powerful. And they increasingly connect the physical space, us as users, and the technology behind. And that's the good side. And now to make it even better, we need frameworks and we need understanding on where we should go. Like I said, this is the first step. And I would very much like for you to all to be in touch. I would like us together develop these frameworks further and thus continue the discussion on the future of the platform economy. Thanks so much.